Alright, hello everyone. And here we are going to be talking strictly about the unit circle. Alright, unit circle was a big part of our trig unit, and it's really important that you remember it. Okay, but remember, if you can think back this far, we really only had to remember our first quadrant, that's this part right here, because everything in the second, third, and fourth quadrants were mirrored, right? Just reflected on different sides. The only things that changed were positives and negatives. Alright, so I've written a little cheat sheet for those positives and negatives in case you forget. Remember, it's just a normal xy axis, so anything to the left is a negative x, anything to the right is a positive x, anything up is a positive y, and anything down is a negative y. Alright, and then these points over here are actually, frankly, all the points that you see. Okay, and every single point we write, remember cosine is our x coordinate and sine is the y coordinate. And then for these three distinctly, I've put the tangents also. Okay, these other ones, the tangents aren't as difficult. Just remember, if it's 0 divided by 1, that's 0. If it's 1 divided by 0, that is undefined. Okay? So the whole purpose of this unit circle is to help us evaluate trig functions. Alright, just like the problems right below. So it says evaluate the function without using a calculator. Exact answers only. So the only way to do it without using a calculator is to know your unit circle. Alright, so I'm going to be looking back at this. Now if you need to pause and jot this down just so you have all the important information, do it. Alright, don't try and write it down while I'm talking because then you're going to miss out on some other important stuff. Alright, that's no fun. So pause it, write it down, and then we'll continue. Alright, so for letter A, we've got the sine of negative 2 pi over 3. Now, in these problems, I like to follow a pretty strict pattern when I'm doing it, like the same steps every time. Alright, my steps are to sketch the angle, so I know where it is. Okay, figure out the reference angle and evaluate it. So evaluate at the reference angle, which we talked about in that other video on trig. Okay, and then the last thing is just figure out positive or negative. So let's try it. Okay, negative 2 pi over 3. So if I sketch that, remember negative angles means go backwards. So this is 0. Alright, I'm going to go backwards. This is negative 3 pi over 3. And I don't really have to go further because I can see it's negative 2 pi over 3. So it's not past that point. Alright, if you need a way to kind of measure where it is though, this is halfway between 0 and 3. So that's like negative 1.5 pi over 3. So it's a little past there. So this angle would be like right about here somewhere. Okay. So now that I've sketched it, I know we are in quadrant 3, and that's important. Alright, now I'm going to evaluate this at the reference angle. So reference angle is right here. That's between negative 2 pi over 3 and negative 3 pi over 3. So the difference would be just pi over 3. So I'm going to evaluate it at the reference angle. So sine of pi over 3. Now this is where our first quadrant comes in handy. Because if I have my first quadrant written down, all I need to do is find pi over 3. And then take the sine, which is the y coordinate. So that would be root 3 over 2. So this is equal to root 3 over 2. So now I have a basis for what my answer should be. The only last question to figure out is positive or negative. Well, I'm in quadrant 3. Quadrant 3 is going down, and this is a y value. So in quadrant 3 we have a negative y, and that means this will be negative 2. So there's my answer. Alright, let's try the same steps for number 2, cosine of 345. Actually, we're going to change this one. 345 is not an angle we can do this with. So let's say it's the cosine of, how about 315 degrees. Alright, so let's go through the same steps. First thing I'm going to do is draw it out. Alright, degrees are a little easier because we know degrees pretty well. 0, 90, 180, 270, and 360. So it looks like 315 will fall in quadrant 4, right about there. Okay, so that is 315 degrees. So now I'm going to evaluate it at my reference angle. Alright, my reference angle here would be between 360 and 315? Well, remember, you only have three options. It's got to be one of these three, unless it's our quadrantal angle. If it's one of these three, and it ends in a 5, hopefully you know which one it would be. 45 degrees. So I'm going to find the cosine of 45 degrees just by using my first quadrant. Alright, so scroll back up, 45 degrees, that's root 2 over 2. So now the only thing left is to figure out whether it's positive or negative. Well, cosine is x. So if I'm in quadrant 4, x is positive. That means it's a positive root 2 over 2, and there's my answer. Alright, last one. Cotangent of negative 60 degrees. So we'll draw it. Remember, this is negative, so I'm going backwards, negative 90 degrees. And we'll look at that. Negative 60 is right about here. Okay, so my reference angle would be this distance between negative 60 and 0. So that would be 60. So the first thing I'm going to do is evaluate the cotangent at 60 degrees. Now, cotangent is one of our reciprocals, so that means we're going to take the tangent and we're going to flip it. Alright, so I'm going to look at my tangent. Tangent of 60 is root 3. So if I flip root 3, it becomes 1 over root 3. And then I just need to rationalize it. So that becomes root 3 over 3. So my answer here is going to be root 3 over 3. The only question is whether it's positive or negative. Well, in quadrant 4, which is where I am, I have a positive x and a negative y. Since tangent and cotangent combine both x and y, if I do a positive divided by a negative, I'm going to get a negative out. So that'll still be a negative root 3 over 3. Alright, the next three we're doing are going to be going backwards. So instead of me giving you the angle, I'm giving you the answer. You need to find the angle. Alright, and we're once again going to use our first quadrant. Here's the one thing you have to remember about these. Okay, and I'll write it down just a little bit down here. When you have, this is inverse, because going backwards, that's like inverse. When you have inverse sine, alright, we only look at the first and the fourth quadrant. That means from, let me scroll down a little, from negative 90 to 90. So our answer has to be in that range. Alright, when I do inverse tangent, it's the same thing. So I'm not even going to write it again. It's the same thing for both of them. Alright, cosine's the only one that's different, so I'm going to write that one down too. For cosine, I look at quadrants 1 and 2. So that means cosine will be between 0 degrees and 180 degrees. Alright, so let's check these out. Inverse sine of 1/2. That means we need the angle that has a sine, so a y value equal to 1/2. Well, let's take a look at our first quadrant. Y value of 1/2. Y value of 1/2. I think I see one. Alright, y value of 1/2. That's 30 degrees, or pi over 6. So there's my answer. Alright, and I can tell that that answer makes sense because it's in the correct range. It's between negative 90 and 90. Alright, let's try letter B. Letter B is a little harder. Cosine inverse of negative root 2 over 2. So cosine is x. I want an x value that's negative root 2 over 2. Well, if I take a look up here, I can see that I have an x value that is positive root 2 over 2. But negative root 2 over 2, that wouldn't be in quadrant 1. Right? That would be in the other quadrant. Well, for cosine, that other quadrant is quadrant 2. So, based on my first quadrant, root 2 over 2 positive is 45 degrees. So I need the angle in this second quadrant that also has a reference angle of 45 degrees. Can you figure out what it is? If not, easiest way for me to do it is to remind myself this is 180. And if a reference angle is 45, I just need to subtract that. So 180 minus 45 is 135. Alright, and in radians, 135, so 180 is, that's 4 pi over 4, minus 1 pi over 4, that would be 3 pi over 4. So those are my answers. Alright, last one. Inverse tangent of negative 1. So that means I need a tangent that is negative 1. Well, once again, I see a tangent of regular 1 right here. and that's awesome. That's 45 degrees as well. But that's not negative 1. So that means for tangent, if it's negative, we're going to be going into quadrant 4. Because for tangent, we only look at 1 and 4, negative 90 to 90. So if it's an angle in quadrant 4 that has a reference angle of 45, that, remember, has to be between negative 90 and 90, then I suppose I'm going to have to call it negative 45 degrees. Or in radians, negative pi over 4. Alright, that's all the unit circle stuff you've got. Make sure to write down any questions you have, and we'll continue reviewing in class. See ya!